Now, the next thing that we need to do, and this actually took me a little bit of research to figure this out because it's a little odd, but it's kind of cool. We need to know what the host name of the computer is. And one of the things that I didn't explain when we were actually going through the program earlier is that one of the features of this pick list kind of thing that we are doing is that the system, the Windows system that's actually going to be doing all the work, it could send a list of selected parts back to the business system and ask it to put them on an invoice or a service ticket or some a purchase order or something like that. And so we need some way to save that information and then allow the user to go back to the business system and select where they would like for that information to show up. So we need to have this pick list be able to go back up to the server. The problem is the server in the particular version that we're working with, it gives them a pick list to choose from, and they need some way to differentiate between their pick list and someone else's pick list that may have been sent from a different computer. And so the way that we work that is we grab the computer name of the computer that they're currently sitting on, and we pass that information back to the calling system so that when they go to the pick list to pick from it, they can go to their computer name, pick it, and load that information wherever it is that they want to load. So host name is something that we need to do. So what we have done, and I'm going to show a few things if I can find them here, because I've been doing research for a couple hours trying to figure this out, is the first thing is we went over here, let's see. We went over here and found a page right here. Well, so we found a function. So what I did is I did a Google for get our host name, Rust host name. And I came up with a function called get host name. And that function is actually inside of a package called get host name. Well, the first problem is that we need to be able to tell Rust that we need that object or that group of code, that library of code. We need it to be downloaded and installed with or compiled with our application so that we actually compile that first and then load in whatever it is we need into our application so that we can use it. Well, so I started off, I found get host name, and so I started digging into what exactly get host name was and where I was going to get it. And so I was trying to figure out exactly, well, how do I tell? I knew that the file that we looked at earlier, and I'll jump over to that file right now. I'm going to split the screen here, and we're going to open up, we'll back up a directory. And let's see, right now we're in PSL. So we're going to open cargo.toml. So I had this dependencies that we talked about earlier. And so I knew I needed get host name down here because that's the name of the environment of the library that we needed. But what I wasn't sure about is the version of it, because the documentation that I found for get host name didn't have any information on it for the actual version. And you'll notice that in the code where we actually are putting this, we have to have a version. So I went to GitHub, I found get host name up there, and I found the version, the current version number of it. And so I grabbed that, and this is what it looks like when you put it inside of the dependencies section of this TOML or TOML file. Now, once this is here, it tells Rust that it needs to go get that. So the next time I do a build or a run or whatever it is I'm doing or a check, it knows that it's missing this get hostname library, and so it goes out and retrieves it. And that's the first part of trying to test this out to see if you can get it to work. Now, once I did that, I also knew that I was going to have a use name up here to actually tell it to include that get host name, and the documentation that I found for get host name actually had it, and in all the stuff I've been doing, I accidentally closed it, so you'll just have to trust me on that. So the use get host name, and remember the dots or the double colons are the same as a dot in most other languages. So get host name, and we're looking for the library for get host name. Now, that got me the ability to call a function called get host name. So let's look down here and see what exactly is going on with that particular function. And I also have one more thing to mention. Earlier I told you that the compiler, when I ran the application, and I'm going to show you what it says right here. It says it says help, and it's pointing at output file, and it says if this is intentional, prefix it with an underscore. And I was saying earlier that I didn't know why it was telling me that, so I ended up adding underscore to all of them. And I was also confused as to why the system wasn't making me do it to input file. Well, the reason is because that error, that warning, is actually telling me that I have declared two variables here that have not been used. And so because they haven't been used, it's asking me to put an underscore in them to get rid of that warning message to signify that I know they haven't been used, and it can ignore the warning. So that's all that was. So I've removed those, and I'll deal with the warnings because I'm going to be adding these things shortly. Now, the first thing that we have to do here is we say let host, and I'm just calling host my variable name. So let host equal, and then we're calling the method or the library get host name, and then get host name is the function. Now when we do that, it is OS specific. So if I'm on a Windows based system, it returns one thing. If I'm on a Linux, it's a different type of object. But what it is what it calls an OS string. And the problem with an OS string is I don't have any way to get to the actual host name. So what I end up having to do, if I wanted to print it, I would have to do the colon question mark that we were looking at earlier to just unwrap that whole thing to show it to me, but I still couldn't access it. Now, there's a couple things going on here that I want to explain. And one of them is pretty cool, is you'll notice I said let host equal get host name. And then right under it, I said let host equal, and I'm doing something else, and it's the same variable name. So this process is, and I'm going to forget the name of it now that I've brought it up. It's called not ghosting, but my brain has stopped working. I'll remember it in a second. So what it does is it actually allows you to use the same variable name, and whatever the last thing that you assign to it will be what the variable name holds. And you can even change the type of variable that you're working with. So I could start off with an integer and change it over to a string if I want to. So instead of having to declare a bunch of different variables to deal with this, which normally you do like a temp and a temp1 or whatever, here you can actually continue to use that same variable name, use that variable name in its assignment, and then do something with it. So in this case, what I'm doing is and it's driving me crazy that I can't remember what that's called. So what I'm doing is I am letting host equal again host, because host is an OS string type, and an OS string type has a function in it that is called into_string. But the problem with into_string, and this gets into error handling in Rust, which we're not going to get in a whole lot right this second, but what happens with an error, a possible function that you're going to call that actually is going to go out and return a value or an error, is that it returns an OK with a capital O. So as an example, it would, in fact, let me switch back over here to the browser and I can actually show you what we're looking at here. So you'll notice right here, it has in the variable here, it says we're calling something here let me get to a simpler one right here. So it calls a method here, a function, to go and open a file called hello.txt. Well, if that file doesn't exist, I'm going to get a panic. I'm going to get an error back. And so I want to try to handle that error. And so what I'm doing right here is we're using the match process to actually, and I'm not 100% on match yet, but match actually will loop through a possible list of enums and decide which one of them is happening right now. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying let f equal, and then I'm saying match f. So again, this is doing this overloading on this variable. I still can't remember what they call it. But it's overloading this variable, and it's setting it now to match f, and it says if you received an OK back, then so the enum was OK, then it gets the value of that return, which in this case is a file handle. And so we're saying return file handle of file back to f. So f ends up becoming what it was originally. But if I get an error back, I'm telling it to panic. Well, I can use this method to try to deal with this string, but at the moment I'm not real sure, and I'm still researching, but I'm not real sure how I know what this type is, because it actually is either going to return a type or it's going to return a error. And the type in the case of an OS string, I'm not exactly sure what that type is when it comes back, so I wasn't real sure what to put in here. But after doing a little bit more research down here at the bottom, I found out that you can actually tell it to unwrap the return value. So instead of looking for OK and having to go in and look to see what is in the return, the enum variable for OK, I can actually unwrap that and have it automatically return that string back to me. And so if you look back over here at the code, that's what I'm doing. I'm telling it, I'm not doing all of the OK and error thing. I'm just saying, go get the host name and then set the host equal to the host into a string, because I'm trying to convert this thing into a string. It's going to return a result type which happens to have an OK and an error in it, but I don't care about all that stuff. I only want to just go ahead and unwrap the string and set it equal to host. So now instead of host in this line here, host is actually an OS string, which I can't really work with easily. So I want to turn it into a string, and so what I've done is I've actually gone in and told it to override the original string with a new string of the same name, but now we're going to convert it into a string. And so what that allows me to do is to treat it just like any other string and print it out at the command line. And so if we close out of the file and we go back over here and run our test, you can see minus our warnings that we have up here, we have down here the name of the computer, and then it has the contents of the file, which we had already printed out in the last video. So I know there's a lot of stuff that we just covered, and like I said, I'm still wrapping my head around all this stuff, but it's kind of cool the way that these messages get returned back, or the results get returned back, and being able to work with the error condition and the result condition at the same time. But it's going to take a bit more using it before I've got it all solid in my head. But right now, that's where we're at with the file. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up the host or the output file so that we can eliminate that warning that we're having up here. And we're also, instead of doing a, where did we open the file? Up here. Or no, right here is where we're contents. So instead of opening up this file to read it, we're actually going to be creating the output file, because the output file isn't something that exists when we get called. It's something that we actually have to go and create. So we're going to do that in the next video. We're going to learn how to actually create the file and handle the error conditions on the create or on the open, because we also have to assume here, and we're already dealing with this expect. And that's another thing, is just like I did an unwrap up here, so I'm converting that over and doing an unwrap. This thing is also getting a result returned, and I'm telling it, instead of unwrapping it, I'm telling it what to do if it expects an error. So in this case, if I can't open that file up, I'm going to get an error that says something went wrong reading the input file. So that is another way to handle functions that you call that could return an error, where you're not really, in this situation, we're not concerned with the return on the OK side because it's already getting assigned to contents. We're more worried about the error message. So expect is another thing that you'll read about in the error handling section of the book that they actually have on their website.